The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Kensington Palace as Sergeant William Thompson adjusted his red uniform for the final time. After 28 years of faithful service to the Royal Guard, today would be his last day protecting the royal family. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he fastened the brass buttons not from age, but from the weight of emotion pressing against his chest. William had served through 3 generations of royals, watching children grow into adults, witnessing history unfold within these ancient walls. He had stood guard during countless ceremonies, state visits, and quiet family moments. But tomorrow his pension would begin, and a younger man would take his place at this very post. The other guards had already said their farewells the evening before, sharing stories and memories over cups of tea in the guardhouse. Some had tears in their eyes as they spoke of William's dedication, his gentle nature with visitors, and his unwavering commitment to duty. He had trained many of them, teaching not just the protocols and procedures, but the heart behind their service. As William took his position by the main entrance, he noticed young Prince George walking across the courtyard with his nanny. The 8-year-old prince was returning from his morning lessons, his school bag bouncing against his small frame. George had always been different from other children William had observed over the years. There was a kindness in his eyes, a genuine curiosity about the people around him, and an unusual awareness for someone so young. The prince often smiled at the guards during his daily routines, sometimes stopping to ask about their families or comment on the weather. Unlike many children who might see the guards as part of the palace furniture, George seemed to understand they were real people with real lives beyond their uniforms. On this particular morning, something seemed different about the young prince. He walked slower than usual, his eyes scanning the familiar faces of the guards stationed around the palace grounds. When his gaze fell upon William, there was a moment of recognition, but also something else, a sadness that seemed too mature for his young features. William maintained his rigid posture, eyes forward, as protocol demanded, but he could feel the prince's gaze lingering on him longer than usual. The morning breeze carried the scent of blooming roses from the palace gardens, mixing with the distant sounds of London traffic beyond the gates. Everything felt ordinary, yet somehow significant. As the prince disappeared through the palace doors, William wondered if the boy had somehow sensed that this was goodbye. Children often possessed an intuition that adults lost over time, an ability to feel changes in the air before they were spoken aloud. The day progressed with its usual rhythm of visitors, deliveries, and ceremonial duties. William performed each task with the same precision he had maintained for nearly 3 decades, but his mind kept drifting to memories of his years of service. He thought about the responsibility he felt toward the family he protected, how that duty had shaped his entire adult life. As afternoon approached, William noticed increased activity around the palace. There were whispered conversations among staff members, meaningful glances exchanged between courtiers, and an unusual sense of anticipation in the air. He wondered if word of his retirement had spread beyond the guard unit, though he couldn't imagine why his departure would matter to anyone beyond his immediate colleagues. Little did William know that Prince George had indeed noticed something different about him that morning, and the observant young royal was about to make a decision that would touch the hearts of everyone in the palace. Inside the palace, Prince George sat at his desk pretending to focus on his afternoon mathematics lesson, but his mind wandered to the guard he had seen that morning. Something about Sergeant Thompson's expression had stayed with him throughout the day. While his tutor explained fractions, George found himself thinking about the kind eyes behind the formal exterior of the guard who had always given him the smallest, most respectful nod whenever their paths crossed. George had always been naturally observant, a trait that sometimes surprised adults around him. He noticed when the kitchen staff looked tired, when his nanny seemed worried about something, or when his parents carried the weight of their responsibilities more heavily than usual. Today he had seen something in Sergeant Thompson's face that looked like sadness mixed with pride, though he couldn't quite understand why. During his break between lessons, George approached his nanny, Mrs. Henderson, who had been with the family for several years and knew the palace staff well. She was organizing his books when he asked quietly, "Mrs. Henderson, is something happening with Sergeant Thompson? He seemed different today." Mrs. Henderson paused, surprised by the question. She had heard through the staff network that today was indeed Sergeant Thompson's last day, but she hadn't expected the young prince to notice. After a moment of consideration, she decided to tell him the truth in an age-appropriate way. "Well, Your Highness, Sergeant Thompson has been protecting your family for a very long time, even before you were born. Today is his last day of work because he's getting older, and it's time for him to rest and spend time with his own family," she explained gently. George's eyes widened with understanding and concern. "You mean he won't be here anymore?" "But he's always been here. Who will stand at his post?" Mrs. Henderson smiled at the boy's genuine worry. "Another guard will take his place, but you're right that Sergeant Thompson has been very special. He's been like a guardian angel for your family." The young prince fell quiet, processing this information. In his 8 years of life, the palace staff had been constant figures, and the idea that someone so familiar would simply disappear felt unsettling. He thought about how Sergeant Thompson had always made him feel safe, how the guard's presence had been as reliable as the sunrise. As his afternoon lessons continued, George found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. His mind kept returning to the image of the guard standing at his post, knowing it would be for the last time. The boy had been raised to understand duty and service, values that were woven into the fabric of his family's existence, but he was only beginning to grasp what sacrifice and dedication truly meant. During his tea time, George sat quietly while his younger siblings played nearby. The weight of what he had learned seemed to settle on his small shoulders like an invisible cloak. He understood that Sergeant Thompson deserved rest and time with his family, but the thought of the man leaving without any acknowledgement felt wrong somehow. George had been taught about gratitude, about recognizing the people who served others with dedication and honor. His parents had always emphasized the importance of appreciating those who worked to keep their family safe and comfortable. But this felt like more than just appreciation. This felt like saying goodbye to someone who mattered. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward evening, Prince George made a decision that would surprise everyone around him. He stood up from his small table, smoothed down his clothes, and walked with determined steps toward his nanny. "Mrs. Henderson," he said with a seriousness that seemed beyond his years, "I need to do something important before Sergeant Thompson leaves. Can you help me?" The earnest expression on the young prince's face told Mrs. Henderson that whatever he had in mind was coming from his heart, and she found herself curious about what this thoughtful boy was planning. Mrs. Henderson knelt down to Prince George's eye level, recognizing the determination in his young face. "What did you have in mind, Your Highness?" "I want to thank Sergeant Thompson properly before he leaves," George said, his voice steady despite his age. "He's protected our family for so long, and nobody seems to be saying goodbye to him." "That doesn't seem right." The nanny felt her heart warm at the boy's thoughtfulness. She had worked with many families over the years, but there was something special about this young prince's natural empathy. "That's very kind of you, George. What would you like to do?" George's brow furrowed in concentration as he considered his options. "Well, I could just go and say thank you, but that doesn't feel like enough. He's been here since before I was born, protecting Papa and Mama, and now he's protecting me and Charlotte and Louis. That's a really long time." Mrs. Henderson nodded encouragingly, curious to see where the boy's thoughts would lead him. George began pacing the small area near the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that reminded her remarkably of his father when deep in thought. When someone has done something really important for a really long time, saying thank you should be special, shouldn't it? George continued. Like when Papa gives medals to people who have served the country well. "But I can't give medals." The young prince stopped pacing and looked directly at Mrs. Henderson with eyes that held a wisdom beyond his years. "But I can give him something else that's important, can't I?" "What do you mean, dear?" George took a deep breath before answering. "I can give him the respect he deserves. I can show him that we see him as a person, not just a guard. Mama always says that seeing people as they truly are is one of the most precious gifts we can offer." Mrs. Henderson found herself genuinely moved by the depth of the boy's thinking. "That's beautiful, George. How would you like to show that respect?" The prince was quiet for a long moment, and then his face lit up with an idea that seemed to surprise even him. "Mrs. Henderson, what if I asked Papa if I could learn about what Sergeant Thompson does? Not just standing there, but really understanding his job? And then, what if I could stand with him for a little while during his last hours, to show him that his work matters?" The nanny's eyes widened at the suggestion. It was unconventional, certainly, and would require approval from several levels of palace hierarchy. But there was something profoundly touching about the young prince's desire to honor the guard service in such a personal way. "That's a very thoughtful idea, Your Highness. It would certainly mean a great deal to Sergeant Thompson. But we would need to ask your father's permission, and it would have to be arranged carefully." George nodded seriously. "I know it's not usual, but maybe sometimes we should do things that aren't usual if they're the right thing to do." The wisdom in his words struck Mrs. Henderson deeply. Here was a child who understood that true leadership sometimes meant stepping outside conventional boundaries when the situation called for genuine human connection. "Shall we go speak with your father?" she asked. Prince George straightened his shoulders, looking every inch the future king despite his small stature. "Yes, but first, can you help me understand exactly what Sergeant Thompson's duties are? I want to know what I'm asking for, and I want to be able to do it properly if Papa says yes." Mrs. Henderson smiled, recognizing that this young boy was already displaying the thoughtfulness and responsibility that would serve him well in his future role. Together, they began planning an approach that would honor both protocol and the genuine affection Prince George felt for the loyal guard who had served his family so faithfully. An hour later, Mrs. Henderson and Prince George found themselves outside the doors of Prince William's private study. The young prince had spent the intervening time learning about the responsibilities and protocols of the royal guard from Mrs. Henderson, who had consulted with the head of palace security to ensure her information was accurate. George had listened intently as she explained the guard's duties: maintaining vigilant watch, checking credentials of visitors, coordinating with security teams, and standing for hours with unwavering attention. He had asked thoughtful questions about the physical demands, the mental focus required, and the deep sense of responsibility that came with protecting the royal family. When they knocked and were invited in, Prince William looked up from his desk where he had been reviewing documents. His face immediately softened when he saw his eldest son's serious expression. "Papa," George began, his voice clear but respectful, "I need to ask you about something important." Prince William set aside his papers and gave his full attention to his son. "Of course, George. What's on your mind?" The young prince took a deep breath and launched into his carefully considered request. He explained how he had noticed Sergeant Thompson's last day, how Mrs. Henderson had helped him understand the guard's years of dedicated service, and how he felt compelled to show proper appreciation for the man's sacrifice and commitment. "I would like permission to stand with Sergeant Thompson during his final hours of duty," George concluded. "Not to play or pretend, but to truly understand and honor what he has given to our family. I want to learn what it means to protect others through service." Prince William listened with growing amazement at his son's mature reasoning and genuine empathy. He exchanged a meaningful glance with Mrs. Henderson, who nodded slightly to indicate that the boy had thought this through carefully and understood the gravity of what he was requesting. "George, this is a very unusual request," his father said slowly. "Standing guard is not a game or a simple ceremony. It requires discipline, focus, and respect for the responsibility involved. Are you certain you understand what you're asking?" "Yes, Papa. Mrs. Henderson helped me learn about what the guards do, and I know it's serious work. But Sergeant Thompson has been protecting you since before I was born, and he's been protecting me my whole life. Doesn't that deserve more than just saying goodbye?" The depth of his son's understanding moved Prince William profoundly. He recognized in George's request not just kindness, but the early development of the qualities that would make him a thoughtful leader someday. This wasn't a child's whim, but a young person's genuine desire to acknowledge service and sacrifice. "If I were to approve this," Prince William said carefully, "you would need to follow all protocols exactly. You would stand at attention, remain silent when required, and treat the duty with complete seriousness. This would be about honoring Sergeant Thompson's service, not about you." "I understand, Papa. I want to do it right." Prince William considered the request for several long moments. It was unprecedented, certainly, but there was something beautiful about his son's instinct to personally recognize faithful service. It spoke to values he and Catherine had worked hard to instill in their children. "Very well," he said finally. "I'll speak with the head of security and Sergeant Thompson himself to arrange this. But George, this must be done perfectly. The Royal Guard represents centuries of tradition and honor. If you're going to participate even briefly, you must embody those same values." George's face lit up with gratitude and determination. "Thank you, Papa. I won't let you down." And I won't let Sergeant Thompson down either." As father and son embraced, Prince William marveled at how his 8-year-old had instinctively understood one of the most important aspects of leadership, recognizing and honoring the people whose dedication makes everything else possible. Within an hour, arrangements were being made for Prince George to join Sergeant Thompson for the final 2 hours of his service, a gesture that would create ripples of emotion throughout the palace and beyond. Word of Prince George's unusual request spread quickly through the palace corridors, carried by staff members who could hardly believe what they were hearing. The idea of the young prince standing guard alongside Sergeant Thompson seemed both touching and unprecedented. Some worried about protocol, while others were deeply moved by the boy's gesture. Sergeant Thompson himself was summoned to meet with the head of palace security, Colonel Matthews, who had the delicate task of explaining the situation. When William heard what Prince George wanted to do, his weathered face showed a mix of surprise, honor, and deep emotion. "The young prince wants to do this for me?" William asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "But sir, I'm just doing my job." "I don't deserve such attention." Colonel Matthews smiled at the humble response that exemplified exactly why Prince George's instincts had been so right. "Sergeant, that attitude is precisely why His Highness felt compelled to honor your service. 28 years of just doing your job has meant everything to this family." The colonel explained the protocols that would need to be followed, emphasizing that Prince George would be expected to maintain complete military bearing throughout the experience. This wasn't ceremonial or symbolic. The boy would be participating in actual guard duty, with all the responsibility and discipline that entailed. Meanwhile, Prince George was receiving his own briefing from Mrs. Henderson and a senior guard who would ensure he understood every aspect of proper protocol. The young prince listened carefully as they explained posture, eye movement, response to visitors, and the sacred trust of protecting the royal family. "Your Highness," the senior guard said, "when you're on duty, you represent not just yourself, but centuries of men and women who have stood watch over the crown. Every moment must reflect that honor." George nodded solemnly. "I understand. I want Sergeant Thompson to be proud that I stood with him." As the afternoon progressed, news of the prince's gesture reached other members of the royal family. Princess Catherine was moved to tears when she heard about her son's thoughtfulness, recognizing in his actions the values she and William had worked so hard to instill. Even the senior staff, who had seen many touching moments within the palace walls, found themselves affected by the young prince's mature empathy. At 4 o'clock, Prince George appeared in the palace courtyard wearing his most formal clothes, polished shoes, and an expression of determined seriousness. Mrs. Henderson had helped him prepare, ensuring every detail of his appearance reflected the respect he felt for the occasion. Sergeant Thompson stood waiting at his post, his uniform immaculate despite the emotional weight of the day. When he saw Prince George approaching with measured, respectful steps, the veteran guard felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Sergeant Thompson," George said formally, stopping at attention beside the guard, "I request permission to stand with you during your final hours of service to thank you for protecting my family." The simple formality of the moment, the young prince's obvious preparation and respect, and the genuine sentiment behind his words created a scene that touched everyone who witnessed it. Sergeant Thompson's eyes glistened as he responded with equal formality. "It would be my honor, Your Highness." And so began 2 hours that would be remembered by everyone present as a perfect example of how recognition, respect, and genuine human connection could transform a simple goodbye into something beautiful and meaningful. Palace staff found reasons to pass by the courtyard, each wanting to witness the sight of the 8-year-old prince standing with perfect posture beside the veteran guard. Both of them united in their commitment to duty and service. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the stone, but neither guard nor prince wavered in their attention. As the 2 hours progressed, something remarkable unfolded in the palace courtyard. Prince George maintained his position with unwavering discipline, his small frame straight and alert, his eyes focused ahead with the same intensity as the veteran guard beside him. Visitors to the palace that afternoon found themselves witnessing an extraordinary scene that none of them had expected. During their time together, Sergeant Thompson found himself deeply moved, not just by the prince's gesture, but by the boy's genuine dedication to doing the duty properly. There were moments when George's young muscles must have ached from the unfamiliar strain of standing at attention, but he never complained or shifted his position inappropriately. When official visitors approached the palace entrance, both guards executed the proper protocols in perfect synchronization. Prince George had clearly mastered the subtle techniques Mrs. Henderson and the senior guard had taught him. The slight acknowledgement of recognized faces, the careful assessment of unfamiliar visitors, and the constant awareness of their surroundings. Word of the prince's gesture had begun to spread beyond the palace walls. Palace photographers, maintaining respectful distance, captured images of the young prince and the veteran guard standing together. The pictures would later become treasured documentation of a moment that perfectly captured the values the royal family sought to embody. During the second hour, Princess Catherine appeared briefly in one of the palace windows overlooking the courtyard. The sight of her eldest son standing with such seriousness and respect beside the retiring guard brought tears to her eyes. She recognized in that moment that George was learning lessons about leadership and human dignity that no classroom could ever teach. Prince William also observed from his study window, feeling immense pride in his son's maturity and character. The young prince was demonstrating qualities that would serve him well throughout his life. The ability to recognize service, the courage to act on his convictions, and the wisdom to honor others in meaningful ways. As the afternoon light began to fade toward evening, palace staff members gathered at respectful distances around the courtyard. Kitchen workers peered from doorways, administrative staff found excuses to pass by windows, and even senior officials paused in their duties to witness this unprecedented display of respect and recognition. Sergeant Thompson felt the weight of 28 years of service settling on his shoulders, but it was a comfortable weight now, made lighter by the knowledge that his dedication had been truly seen and valued. Standing beside Prince George, he felt that his years of protecting the royal family had led to this perfect moment of connection and understanding. With 30 minutes remaining in his final shift, something unexpected happened that would make the day even more memorable. Prince William appeared in the courtyard, walking with measured steps toward where his son and the sergeant maintained their vigilant watch. The presence of the future king added a new dimension to the moment. Here were 3 generations represented: the veteran guard who had served with such dedication, the prince who would one day wear the crown, and the young boy who was learning what it truly meant to lead through service to others. As Prince William approached, both Sergeant Thompson and Prince George maintained their positions, but there was a palpable sense that something significant was about to unfold. The late afternoon air carried the sound of distant London traffic and the soft rustle of leaves in the palace gardens. But the courtyard itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what would come next. The final moments of Sergeant Thompson's service were approaching, and everyone present sensed they were witnessing something that would be remembered long after this day had passed into history. Prince William approached with the bearing and dignity befitting his position, but there was also warmth in his expression as he took in the sight of his son standing alongside the loyal guard. When he reached them, both Sergeant Thompson and Prince George maintained their formal positions, though the young prince's eyes flickered briefly to his father's face. "Sergeant Thompson," Prince William said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "after 28 years of faithful service to my family, the time has come for your watch to end." The veteran guard stood even straighter if that were possible. "Yes, Your Royal Highness. But before you leave us," Prince William continued, "I want you to know that your service has been observed, valued, and deeply appreciated. You have protected not just buildings or positions, but people, my parents, my wife, my children. You have been a guardian of what we hold most precious." Sergeant Thompson's composure wavered slightly at these words, but he maintained his military bearing. Prince William then turned to his son, his pride evident despite the formal setting. "George, your decision to stand with Sergeant Thompson today has shown wisdom beyond your years. You have demonstrated that true leadership means recognizing and honoring those who serve with dedication and sacrifice." The young prince nodded seriously, understanding that this moment was about more than just saying goodbye to one guard. It was about the values that would guide him throughout his life and eventual reign. Prince William then did something that surprised everyone present. He stepped into position alongside his son and Sergeant Thompson, creating a line of 3 generations united in respect and service. For several minutes, all three stood together in perfect silence. The future king, the future king, and the guard who had dedicated his career to protecting them both. As 6 o'clock approached, the official end of Sergeant Thompson's shift, Prince William spoke again. "Sergeant Thompson, your watch is ended. Stand down with honor." The words carried profound meaning in military tradition, acknowledging not just the end of a shift but the completion of a lifetime's dedication. Sergeant Thompson executed one final perfect salute, which Prince William returned with equal precision. Prince George, following his father's lead, offered his own small but perfectly formed salute. The moment that followed was pure magic. As Sergeant Thompson stepped back from his post for the final time, applause began to ripple across the courtyard. Palace staff who had gathered to witness this unprecedented scene began clapping, their appreciation filling the evening air. Kitchen workers, administrators, gardeners, and security personnel all joined in acknowledging the guard's years of service. Prince George stepped forward then, his young voice clear in the courtyard air. "Sergeant Thompson, thank you for keeping my family safe. I hope when you think about your time here, you'll remember that we saw you not just as a guard, but as someone who cared about us." The simple, heartfelt words from the 8-year-old prince finally broke Sergeant Thompson's composure. Tears filled his eyes as he looked down at the boy who had chosen to spend his afternoon learning about duty. "Service and respect, Your Highness," Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion. "Standing with you today has been the greatest honor of my career. Thank you for showing an old soldier that his service mattered." As the sun set over London, casting golden light across the palace courtyard, Sergeant Thompson walked away from his post for the final time. But he carried with him something more valuable than any medal or commendation: the knowledge that his years of dedication had been truly seen, understood, and honored by the very people he had sworn to protect. Prince George watched until the retiring guard disappeared from sight, then looked up at his father. "Papa, I think I understand now why being a leader means serving others first." Prince William smiled, knowing that his son had learned one of the most important lessons of his young life. The gentle decision to honor Sergeant Thompson's service had created ripples of meaning that would influence how Prince George approached leadership for the rest of his life. In years to come, whenever Prince George faced difficult decisions about how to treat those who served the crown, he would remember this evening and the veteran guard who taught him that true nobility lies in recognizing the dignity and worth of every person who contributes to something greater than themselves.